welcome everybody. We're delighted you're here. This is the first public event of the Center for Sustainable Media. It will not be the last. We're excited to get your feedback on this event and other things we'll be doing in the future. A little bit of a brief explanation of this organization and how it's come to be in the last month and a half. A bunch of folks were talking casually about their concerns about kind of some of the trends going on the planet. I don't have to repeat any of them because I think probably we all know what they are. And it kept coming back to this phrase that people would say, which is the media as it exists today is not sustainable. And that became kind of the center of a conversation, which has now become an organization that as of today has 70 amazing advisors and is growing every day. And we'll put up on the screen the website. You're welcome to look at it, join. There'll be a newsletter coming up in the fall. But all of those conversations came down to one thing, which is, if this thing called media is impacting the planet, shouldn't we be thinking about that more broadly than to just say media is news media or media is social media? And so we've made an attempt here today to talk about media broadly. And that means streaming media, sports media, gaming, social media, media that amplifies, as our friend Bartunde Thurston said so powerfully, amplifies hate for profit. And so with that, as we began our early conversations, my colleague Esther Dyson said, wouldn't it be great if we had a neuroscientist, psychologist who can think about the impact of media journalism on persuasion and its attempts on human minds? And I said, well, I happen to know somebody that I would think would be perfect for that. And so that is how Uri became our first guest. And before I introduce Uri, I should tell you about our co-host. So Frank Rose is an author, teacher, well-known writer. His latest book, The Sea We Swim In, How Stories Work in a Data-Driven World, is very much the topic of this conversation. The sea that we're going to talk about is storytelling and data, and the world is messy and getting messier. So with that, welcome Frank, welcome Uri. And Frank, I thought I would let you kick things off with the first question. So welcome to both of you.
Sure, okay, great. Thank you, Steve. And Uri, I'm really glad to have you here. We spoke briefly for the book when I was researching it, and I was completely fascinated by your experiments, and I just wanted to kind of ask you about them, and sort of run people through maybe how this developed, the work that you've been doing. As I recall, the first major paper that you had was when you were at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel, and you did a study of an fMRI study, neuroimaging study of people's brains as they were watching the good, the bad, and the ugly. This was rather controversial, but you came up with some very interesting results, and I'm wondering if you could just describe those for us now.
Happy to be here. It's always a weird feeling that you talk to a group of people that you don't know, and you don't even see their faces. You don't know what they are tuned, you don't know what their background, so it's always weird. Thank you for the people that are opening the camera. That's always nice to see other people become more personal. Okay, so first, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm in Princeton University, and usually I'm speaking to neuroscientists. So in a way, I'm out of the water. So I don't know the level of engagement. I don't know your background. So I try to be simple. You can always open the mic and ask me things to clarify. We're looking on people, brain responses, while they are engaging in real life communication. So listening to stories or movies, that's one example, but also what's happening in my brain when I'm speaking to you, in your brain when you are listening to me. And what we find over and over is something really amazing, is that when we speak, even now, I have an heavy accent. It's difficult to understand me. I apologize for that. Nothing I can do. And we speak in through this like very weird medium of Zoom. But even in this context, what's happening now is our brain start to be coupled and similar to each other. So what do I mean? Think about it that way. Think that I have now brain patterns in my brain that reflect what I want to tell you. And now I'm transmitting these like brain waves into sound waves. And this sound waves is going to the Zoom and change your brain waves. So in a way, your brain waves are now coupled to my brain wave via this like sound wave. So there is really coupling between us. And what I'm doing now by speaking, I'm trying to make your brain responses similar to mine. Now, if you're completely lost and don't get what I'm saying, your brain is very different than mine. If you start to get me and understand me, the coupling is stronger. And if you really get me, your brain responses is very similar to mine.
So I mentioned the experiment with the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm really fascinated by these because, then you went on to do more experiments at Princeton, I believe, where you looked at people's brains in fMRI as they were watching not just the good, the bad, and the ugly, but an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, the Larry David Show, and and just some random footage in Washington Square Park. And what you found, as I recall, is essentially that the level of the way in which people's brains responded similarly increased according to maybe we could call it the directedness of the videos or movies that they were watching. So Hitchcock, much more so than any of the others. Washington Square Park, practically none.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is a different way to formulate what we were saying. So I was talking about like communication.
Right.
But in another way, you can think about it that because I'm trying to make your brain similar to mine, in a way, I'm also trying to control your brains. Right? I want to change the shape of your brain to be similar to mine. And the level of control can really vary, right? For example, Alfred Hitchcock was a master of communication. He knew exactly what the audience is going to think in each frame. He was thinking about himself as a scientist that do experiment with the audience. So when you're Alfred Hitchcock, you really control. I don't think I'm getting to this level of control, right? And in real life, sometimes you meet people that are totally boring and you are totally not engaged. And then there is like less level of coupling. But even in this case of, if you think about it as a control, it's still a meeting of the minds, right? You can decide to turn off the Zoom. You can decide to open now your phone and look on Facebook, right? You can be disengaged. So it's, even if I'm trying to change your brain, you want also to be coupled to me. It's really meeting of two brains. So, and you see it a lot, you can see people on the other aisle that doesn't want to listen to the committee, the sixth general committee. They simply don't listen. You cannot force people to listen. You cannot force people to be engaged if they don't want to. So describing it as only as an effort to control your brains is a bit will be misleading because we need to convince you to meet with the other speaker, to meet with the other brain. And this is why coupling is a two-way engagement.
So you keep using this word control, and I assume you're not using it casually. So did Alfred Hitchcock mean to control his audience?
Yeah, that in his writing, he's saying, I'm doing an experiment on the audience. I know exactly that you're going to think that he is the murderer, and then I'm going to surprise you and point to her as the murderer. So, he was like controlling each frame to lead you to think something and then surprise you. It was a total control. But and you know, and you see it as well when basically when you listen to a podcast or you listen to a political speech, people writing it in a precise way to have a precise impact. So,
but he wasn't asking you to go be a murderer.
no. I ask you to think something and then surprise you. That's the point. Basically, there are two types of conversations. One is that is highly controlled, is in a way also one way, right? Hitchcock controlled the movie, but he didn't ask you to speak. And there is this open-ended conversations, right? I didn't plan slides. We engage in conversation that I don't know what will be the next questions, right? And the audience as well. This is a different, this type of two-way conversation is more, I will use the word coupling, brain coupling, and less of control. And I will leave the level of control more to rehearse one way, high production value storytelling.
I don't want to jump ahead. You're raising all kinds of questions I want to ask, but we'll get there in a moment. So, Frank, continue with your line of reasoning.
Sure. So this idea of the brain coupling and the level of control, is this sort of a continuum in your view? If we move from, can we move from coupling to actually controlling or directing, maybe a less loaded term?
Yes, I'm not. Even in this conversation, I'm trying in a way to influence the audience. So there is a level of engagement and trying to transfer an idea, right? So it's always there is a level of basically control, even in open conversation. But the level of control may be vary, right? Basically, if it's really high production value, you leave no place for chance, right? So you rehearse, you cut, you edit. Editing is a way of controlling, right? Over here, I cannot edit. I'm saying something, it took us to a different path I didn't mean to. Now we're stuck in this path, right? Basically, it's more difficult to control in conversation. And therefore, my metaphor for conversation is more like dancing. When people dance together, you think about it, but basically, if I'm going to mimic the other dancer and I'm going to do exactly the same movement, you are a very boring partner. If you completely random and you say something unrelated to what your partner is doing, you're not a good couple, right? But if one is influencing the other, and there is like a part of synchrony, part of new space that you explore together, then you become interesting partner, and that's what you want in conversation, more like this, like coupling of dynamical interaction.
Right. Okay. So this idea of high production value, is that sort of a main determinant in terms of level of control, or obviously we can have conversations, or you can have talking heads on TV, which is not terribly high production values, and that can be I suppose pretty convincing also, or pretty much steering people in one direction or another.
Yeah, correct. I mean, even in free conversation, you can have this like a coupling. So it's not it. I would say the main factor. I think there are two factors that we see that are the most important. That the audience want to listen. Okay, so if you don't have an audience, there's nothing you can do. You can be the best speaker, not going to help you. If the audience is not with you, you're gone. So the audience needs to be engaged. And then another factor that is really important also in the audience side is what the audience is coming with. we always thinking about the quality of the storyteller. We never think about the background of the listeners. And that's a key. Okay. If your listeners, okay, I'm going to give like example from real life. If the listeners believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim that come to destroy the country, nothing will happen to Obama, to talk with this audience. He cannot penetrate such a strong prior. And we never think about what the audience is coming to the table. We only think, oh, Obama is an amazing speech writer, right? He's really know to deliver, and he's a great speaker, right?
But I guess my question is, if you go back in time to when there were 3 network newscasts, ABC, CBS, and NBC,
yeah,
wouldn't it be easier for those 3 voices, those male, white-haired, kind of authoritarian voices, to be controlling? And wouldn't one argue that in this world where there's a zillion podcasts and a zillion different voices, that it would be harder for there to be control of an audience?
Yes, absolutely. So, okay, so to ground it in the science that we do, basically, so we talked about what the audience is coming with to the conversation. Another way to say is, what is the shared meaning? What is grounding and make us connect? Okay. So now, if I'm really, for example, believe that Obama is a terrorist, I'm coming to the conversation with a different, basically, memories and opinions, right? And when it used to be that it would be like only 3 channels, most of us were listening to the same input. So we became more similar to the conversation. Now that people come with very different, sometimes crazy, different opinions, right? So the conversation becomes very difficult because we don't have a shared meaning. We don't agree on the things, and then we're listening to different stories. Maybe to be concrete, can I take 1 minute to describe one experiment so people will understand what we do?
Yes,
like,
and by the way, we're going to open it to audience questions in a little bit. So stay put for a second and let Uri continue. Yes, tell us about an experiment.
Okay, so I'm going to do like one experiment. You know, we have like so many papers, and this is one experiment. I think it will make things a bit more clear. Okay, so we took a story by J.D. Salinger. Okay, and the story, you know, a short story, very, very simple. I will give you the context. Husband lost track of his wife in a party. He's go back to his apartment in New York, middle of the night. He come. The wife is not there. He's very anxious. He's calling his best friend on the phone. Did you see my wife? I don't know where she is. I'm so worried. Can I come over and be with you till she will come in? I'm very worried. Next to the best friend, there is a naked woman. And Salinger is smart. He doesn't tell you her identity. Sometimes when you read the paper, you think, oh, this is the wife having an affair with the best friend. And sometimes you think, this is the girlfriend, and this husband is really jealous, but the wife is very loyal. So you have this like 2 ideas in mind, and you're always jumping between. So we told people before the story started, as a good scientist, we ruined the story. Okay, we ruined the ambiguity. For half of the people, we say the wife having an affair, the naked woman is the wife. For the other part of the subject, we told them the wife is loyal, this is the girlfriend, and the husband is very jealous. And this like one sentence was enough to change the brain responses of people. So all people listened to the story in the fMRI while we looked on the brain and listening to the exact same story. The only difference was this like one line before the story started. So the story is exactly the same. And now we're looking on the brain responses, and we're looking how people are similar to other people that think like them. So we look how people are similar in the group that think that the wife has an affair. and how similar are the brain of the people that think that the husband is jealous. And by looking on this, like how similar are people, how they are coupled together, it was enough for us to know what other people are thinking. So let's say I'm taking you into the scanner and I'm telling you the wife and affair. To half of you, and the half of you, I'm telling the husband is jealous. And now, if I'm looking into your brain and I need to guess what you are thinking without knowing, it will be 50-50 guessing. I'm looking how similar is your brain responses to other people, and I can predict 90% accuracy what you are thinking, based on how similar you are that people that think like you. So I really can look into your brain and know what you are thinking based on your similarity to other people in the group. And yes.
So I'm sorry, but it's making me, listening to you is making me anxious, because we're talking about these relatively harmless examples, but I think that what's on everyone's mind are some far more global, terrifying things going on in terms of how speech is being used to program people. And I know that that's a lot of what you're thinking about too. So how has, a lot of the experiments you're talking about go back to 2008. Is there work going on in the lab in the last 3 to 5 years that makes this more current and more troubling?
Yes. Okay, so think about it that way. Basically, I was telling you one sentence before, and it changed the way you process the story. I was telling you wife have an affair, and you came to the same story, and your brain responses changed. If I can change your brain responses with one sentence was enough to make you similar to the group of people that believe like you, right? Think what happened when you listen over and over and over to the same sentence. The election was stolen. Okay, the election was stolen. The election, and it's repeating over and over and over. And you don't listen to it one time. It's like 1,000 times. That's going to affect the way you will process new information. There is nothing you can do to stop it from happening. Basically, what we're finding now in the lab, we start to use more deep language models. So it's more of AI models that you all heard about. GPT-2, you heard about GPT-3 now, there is T5, BERT, there's many models like that. These are statistical models. They learn language from the statistics. And once they learn the statistics, they can really generate new content, right? And we have evidence that the brain is very similar to these models. We also like statistical learning machines. So we learn by the statistics. And if we have a very biased statistic and someone is repeating 1,000 times the same message, we're going to believe in it, no matter whether it makes sense or not matter whether there is an evidence or not. That's basically what we learn about the human mind. Basically, it's a statistical learning machine.
What about when, a couple of things that are happening with social media that, sort of figure in here in this kind of conversation. I'm curious if you've done any research on this or if you have any thoughts on it. But one is social media is algorithmically driven, obviously. So you're going to, if there's a video, let's say that you've responded to, you're going to be shown more of those videos, and that obviously has an impact in the political context. And the other is, the feedback loop. You're constantly, being sort of more or less in conversation or communication, let's say, with lots of other people. And that's going to affect your responses too, I assume. So I'm wondering, how this, what the multiplier effect is, so to speak, of this versus something that's more conventional, more traditional news channel, like just a news report that you're watching on TV?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a dynamic loop over it, right? So okay. So remember, first there is what you think and what really happened, right?
Right.
And there's a difference. As a scientist, I want to make it clear for the audience for a second. It's like a slightly a detour, but then I'm going to go directly to your question. So I'm not like I'm simply adding a bit more of context to the audience. Let's think, for example, on the January 6th committee, right? There is a universe in which Trump really orchestrated and make it happen, and there is a universe in which it's fake news, right? And now you need to decide between the two. So first, there is what you think and what really happened. And how do you know what really happened? As an audience, it's really complicated. We need to hear the committee, we need to hear the recording, the investigation. There is a lot of evidence that we need to accumulate to decide what happened, and this is not easy for us. In most cases, we don't do the investigation, right? We don't have the power, so we simply read or listen to other people. So in many cases, what we believe in, and this is going back to which media we are consuming, going to affect what we think, right? And now, this media will always happen, was before, right? So there's like nothing new, right? Like TV, newspaper, this media was before. So what is the difference? The main difference become who decide what we read, okay? So it used to be that, there were like 3 channels, and they decided. And by law, they were designed to tell us both sides of the story. That was by law. This law was revoked. Now, basically, a news channels can be a propaganda channel. It can say whatever it wants. So now we have a new type of TV that is one-sided. Let it be Fox News or MSNBC. Okay, we have these like new channels that only one side. They tell one story to the audience. This is a new development. And on top of it, there is another development. And this is like social media that amplify what you want. Think about it. This media channel, you say algorithmic, let's be a bit more precise than algorithmic. And this is go back to machine learning. They have an objective. What if the objective of Facebook, okay, or YouTube, what is the objective? The objective is simple. Stay 1 more minute on my platform, and I will sell 1 more ad in 5 cents, multiplied by billions of users, and I've got good business. Give me only 1 more minute of your time. Now, the machine learning behind it do experiment on you. If you saw this content, there is a chance that you will also like this content. We don't know what is the content. We only know that you will stay 1 more minute. If your content is to be global warming is the worst disaster, we need to be more great, that will be your content. If your content is that fake news, we will give you this content. If the content is that liberal destroying America, that will be your content. In a way, the social media amplify the content you want. They don't care about what you consume as long as you stay 1 more minute. And this amplification, think of it like a drug dealer. I will give you more of what you want, and you will give me a bit more of your time. This is the deal. And this deal basically pushes people to the extreme, because now you hear only what you want, but it's amplified and amplified and amplified. And then you're stuck in your own bubble and become more and more extreme, because you heard it not like 5 times, you heard it like 1,000 times or 10,000 times. And this is exactly what you wanted to hear. It doesn't matter if you want to hear liberal context, you will hear liberal context. If you want to hear right-wing content, you will get right-wing content. There is no difference. Okay, it's simply amplifying for the revenue of the company, regardless whether this is like a reasonable content or going to destroy your mind, you will get it.
So when you use the drug dealer analogy, I just want to be clear that everyone's following along at home. You mean that the product is addictive?
Yeah, because the machine designed to give you content that will keep you engaged with the platform 1 more minute. So basically, the idea of the content is like consume more. This is exactly when drug dealers give you something, they want you to consume it more. Okay, so this is why the analogy is correct. It's in a way tell you, I want your mind to consume on my platform content. But they are agnostic about which content, whatever content you want. But please stay with us.
So have you done experiments with fMRI that either put politically diverse audiences in front of the machine or social media audiences? I think that's what's in the air is if we think this is a problem, how have we defined it and how have we started to record it?
I mean, yes, we do similar experiment, not exactly the one that we described, but similar experiment, and we see it more and more. But I have to say something, let's go back to 2016 when Trump was elected. And they started to talk about Russia influencing the election via fake news on Facebook. It was really new to most of the people, okay? And we started to think, can it happen? What is the impact? Can we assess it? I think now, 6 years later, we're in a different position. I don't think it's a matter of doing the experiment. I think we already know how it's working. We really understand it. It's more about how to change reality. Then, I can do another experiment in my lab and publish another paper. It won't change reality, right? So if we're really talking in this forum about what we do with our knowledge, it's a different game than I do a small little additional experiment to prove the point. I think we're already behind this point. I think we know it already.
All right, so let's open this up to the audience because we have a number of extraordinary people who come to this subject with their own either experiments or experience. And I want to make sure that we have a chance to hear from everybody. So either if you can figure out where on the Zoom platform to raise your hand, do that. Otherwise, just use the old manual, raise your hand, and we'll call on people. There have been some very interesting conversations in the chat, but rather than me reading people, if you said something in the chat that you'd like to ask Uri, now's the time to repeat it. Just raise your hand and we'll move around the room. Someone has to go first.
Hi, I really enjoyed this and I really love the TED Talk as well. There's tons of stuff I'd like to ask, but before I do, I think this is super complex. And so I want to try and say some of the things I understood to make sure my brain resonated with your brain. So one was, when we look at the preferred programming language of humans, it's storytelling. The better the storyteller, potentially the better the resonance with other people and potentially the better the programming in a way. I love the fact that you used Jim O'Grady from The Moth and that particular story in your testing, because the whole point of it was to tell you that storytelling is more compelling if you don't let facts and reality get in the way of the story.
Yeah.
So I think we're already observing that our primary program language has some flaws in it. It is more compelling if truth isn't always necessarily observed. There's some truth that's compelling, but truth doesn't always come into it. And this is something that we know within the information business. there's a conversation we've had over a couple of years about the concept of complicating the narrative. In order, making the narrative more complex potentially stops people from going down a very specific lack of nuanced route into information. One of the difficulties is it's less compelling. So what we have is this sort of challenge, which I think you've raised, which is you're ultimately saying complicate the narrative, complicate it by having dialogue with people, and that helps you to understand where they're coming from. But we're in this very interesting era where we have this kind of collapse of community, where those conversations aren't being had so much. And in addition, we have infinite choice for how we want to communicate or consume, so on and so forth. And so when you talk about sort of the dialogue, am I getting correct that we want to try and complicate the narrative? And if so, like, have you seen any really great examples of where that's working very well?
Yeah, I'm not sure that dialogues complicate stuff. I don't think I want to complicate the conversation. I think basically, if you talk only with people on your side, you get half of the story, or half the story if you have like two sides of the story. But if it's multidimensional, you get like a fraction of the story, right? So that reality. It's not about complicating the message, or it's simply about who is your audience and what is the purpose of the communication. And if you want basically to talk to your base, talk to your base. And I think that was what Trump was doing all along. He was talking to his base. And it was very effective. We thought that the base is small. Apparently the base is very big. So that's reality. Trump was very simple in his messaging. Too simple to our taste, but it was very effective. And it's not about complication.
Sorry, I should have one clarification. When I say we should complicate the narrative, I actually work for a social media company, and so
social media should do something else.
Which one?
I work on Twitter.
All social media. There is they will never do it. Okay, so basically we're wasting the time.
No, they're not.
They're not, but they have to do one thing, and it's very
strong
simple.
narrative there.
Mm-hmm. No, they should stop pushing you information. Feed. You should stop the feed. You only have to stop the feed. This is it. If you're stopping the feed, you remove the drug dealer dynamic. They will never stop the feed because this is the revenue.
Right, Esther, you're
so should we never recommend, like Netflix should never recommend you
films? Never recommend. Netflix should stop.
No recommendations.
No recommendation. You
blogs?
No recommendation. You should search. This is what I'm trying to educate my kids. It's so difficult. I'm not sure I'm ever man. But I'm trying to say my kids and everyone else. Search for the content. Do active search. And when you get a suggestion, people that search this got this, stop and don't read. Never have the click. The second click is the problem. The feed is the problem.
All right, Esther, you're next.
Yeah, I mean, that may or may not be realistic. Yeah. I think, honestly, in the end, what you want to do is have people better educated about how to manipulate themselves rather than being manipulated. I mean, you're never going to have people stop selling ice cream, but you want people to understand the motivations of the people selling ice cream. But what I'm more interested about, because this argument isn't going to go anywhere, is just the fact that what you're really trying to do is manipulate people to manipulate other people. So you want to have some girls go on and look really sexy so that the other girls want to be sexy too. And they keep scrolling through TikTok or something, seeing how to be sexy. And they get lost in this desire, not for being sexy, but for more. because what addiction is the desire for more and the relief that gives you, but then more is never enough. And if other people around you are having more than you are, that's where it really explodes, and you get what we got.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think I'm completely in agreement, and I also think that it will never work. So I'm also pessimistic as you're. So let's take this analogy of the ice cream. Think about it. The more sugar and salt you're going to mix in your ice cream, it will be more addicted. You will want it more. Now there are two ways to go. One is educate your consumer that sugar is going to make you diabetic and consume less. Another way is to regulate the manufacturer to say there's the amount of sugar that you can put, and beyond it, you are poisoning the people and you should stop. Both of them should take place, and both of them are very difficult. And this is a constant fight.
So maybe you help people understand that the problem is not the sugar. The problem is their relationship with the sugar. Again, it's understanding about themselves as well as about the sugar. This ice cream isn't.
Yeah. There is the consumer and there is the manufacturer, and you need to regulate both, right?
But it's more understanding. This ice cream isn't going to make me happy. What is going to make me happy is walking with my friend and having a small piece of ice cream, but just. Again, it's not the dangers of sugar that we need to teach them. It is how to have a better relationship with themselves, with what they need, with their own thinking patterns.
I agree. That's what I was saying. Basically, educate people how to do like smart search and avoid the feed. This is the one example of you educate the behavior of the user, right? So you want to educate the user, and you want to educate the companies. I think you need both in a way.
We've got a stack of questions stacked up, so I want to make sure. Yael, go ahead.
There's a million different questions I could ask, but in the chat, I had put a quick comment at some point when you were talking about sort of how media, newspapers, and whatnot. I think one of the key things that was really not missed, but wasn't reported on enough from the Facebook leaks from the documents was the research showing that political parties in Europe were actually engaging in more and more extreme rhetoric in order to get algorithmic pickup on Facebook. And in turn, that turned around and committed parties in Europe to more and more extreme positions. And the reason I bring this part up, in addition to like 55 other things I'd love to bring up right now, is there's always this sort of chicken and egg debate of, is it the social media's fault? Aren't they just showing us what we want to see? But when you're actually tilting the scales to give algorithmic boost to more salacious content, you are actually causing political parties to also realize that and engage in more and more extreme rhetoric. Yeah. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that point, because I think it's something that we don't talk enough about, and we just kind of do this mirror to society thing people love to say in place of that.
You have to correct. I wanted to mention it, and thank you for allowing me to mention it because I didn't, but it was on the back of my mind. And this is again the analogy with drugs will be effective over here. So we know that once you start to be addicted, you need higher and higher dose to get the same effect. There is habituation in the brain, and you need to increase the dose. And the same is happening with news. Once you hear something, the next clip have to be slightly more extreme for you to listen and to be engaged. And this is something the machine discovering about ourselves without anyone in Facebook programming it to the model. The machine discover that if they want you 1 more minute on their platform, it needs to be slightly more extreme version of what you saw before. So there is internal amplification because this is our mind want to get more and more extreme, to be more and more engaged. And this is why the conspiracy levels start very low. There's actually a beautiful podcast, I'm sure you all listen to it, in the New York Times, The Rabbit Hole, that discuss this process intensively and highly documented. It's going to be more and more and more extreme, only for you to stay more and more in the platform. And so it's part of the dynamic of this, like coupling with the feed.
Dave R., you have a question.
Thank you. I put two items in the chat, and I'd like to just talk about both of them. First of all, we're in a bubble. I mean, everybody here, I doubt that there's anybody on this call who hasn't been to college, and very likely a lot of people here have been to graduate school. Now, the average intelligence, by definition, the average IQ is 100. It's designed that way, which means about half the population has an IQ below 100 and is not only, it's not a question of not being capable. A lot of these people are just not interested. And back in 50 years ago, most of these people did not watch the news. And there was no reason for them to watch the news. They watched sports. And I wrote in there about Roone Arledge, who was the director of ABC TV Sports, created ABC's Wide World of Sports, made ABC the #1 sports station. And then in 1977, he was put in charge of ABC News, and he turned the news into sports. So instead of the news being about what's happening, it became about who's winning. And now because it's about who's winning, you don't have to know anything to follow the news. All you have to do is choose a side and see how your side is doing. And suddenly a lot of people who never watched the news started watching ABC News because it wasn't news, it was sports. Yeah. And then after Reagan came in and ended the fairness doctrine, which required stations to broadcast all sides of the issue, the stations basically became fan stations.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what's been going on. And the other point I made is that Fox News basically does not try to inform their viewers. They try to make them angry. And they try to make them angry because anger creates the release of adrenaline. And adrenaline is very addictive. Ask any serious skier.
Yeah.
And so Fox viewers watch Fox News for this. Fox viewers don't watch CNN or these other stations, not because they don't trust them, but because, or for the same reason, advanced skiers don't ski the bunny slope. They don't get their fix. And they don't do this because they don't do this for ideology. They do this just to keep the viewers tuned in to make the money. And social media do exactly the same thing to keep the viewers online. And I guess my question was, have you looked at blood chemical while people are watching things, aside from fMRI? And have you looked at that?
There is a connection. It's coming. You know, fMRI is not the best tool, but it's also there's evidence from fMRI, not from my lab, but also from my lab, actually, about dopamine release. And that related. This is why this addiction coming again and again, because it's highly related. And you're right. And when you move to this like sport metaphor, it's better than the complication of the message or telling like the right message, because if basically is your team is winning and you don't care about the message, you only care about your team winning, then finding the right message, we don't care what Trump did, is in our team. If this is the game, how do you win it with like highly articulate the message? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough place to be.
So if we're talking about addiction, which seems to be where we've ended up, then are we talking about wanting a government regulation that's more FDA than FCC?
Yeah, but as you were saying before, and people said it before, and I think Esther was saying it, it's not going to happen, right? We need regulation, and we have such a weak political system that cannot regulate anything. Even the sugar in the food, they cannot regulate. So you want them to regulate the news. Reagan law that was mentioned by Dave was a disaster. It's a disaster that created Fox News. and make it all superficial, can we change the law and tell the news media, tell both sides of the story, give both facts? Can we make it more neutral and less like team sport-like? No, we can't. We cannot regulate Facebook. We cannot regulate. I don't know what to do. I honestly, I'm very pessimistic because I don't know how the solutions are clear, but are impossible to implement. And
Well,
we see the world falling apart.
I mean, the good news about this organization is that we have different people bringing different skills to the table. So you're going to lay things out in a scientific way, and then there are other people that are going to look at anthropology, and some people are going to look at sociology, and there may be solutions that come from different points of view. I want to make sure we have time for Mario, because there was a side conversation going on, Mario, about your work that I'd love to just hear about, and maybe there's a question there. Mario, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, amazing. I'm in the Eastern European countryside, so I don't know how good my connection is right now. Sorry, what was the question?
Well, there was a whole conversation going on in the chat about your work, and I just would be interested to hear how that fits into this conversation.
So I mean, there's a lot to it, but something we've been trying to educate people is on the idea of information wellness, and paralleling strongly kind of the idea of the obesity epidemic we experienced, and connecting that to the idea of infobesity. And so what we've kind of encountered is there's such a lack of feedback and awareness in terms of the hours we spend consuming media when compared to how we think about how we feed our bodies. And so providing people with even the most basic feedback to quantify it and give them perspectives on that leads to a pretty immediate change in behavior. So that's just been really interesting to see, especially with students and young people who, you know, we tend to think, oh, Gen Z is, you know, it's second nature to them. They know these things. But the fact of the matter is that they're more aware of the manipulation, but they are equally ill-equipped to do anything about it and be able to, you know, and to think through it. So that's kind of the nature of what we've been working on.
What's the name of the company?
Readocracy. Stands for Reading, Times, and Meritocracy, Supporting Democracy.
Cool. We have time for just one or two more questions if we're going to run out of time. I would put this, Uri, to you. Since you're now measuring these things, you know, not to be cynical, but in some ways, I wonder if the split in the way that information is delivered essentially makes, you know, MSNBC as equally responsible for trying to trigger people and create an addictive engagement, and, you know, want me to be able to, you know, watch their version of the story as opposed to Fox News's version of the story. It seems to me like everyone's playing with the same toolkit and they know it.
Yes and no. So I think yes, in the sense that they are one-sided and they have an agenda and they try to push it. So this is true also of the New York Times and MSNBC, not only about Fox News. Okay, so, but there is one difference, and it's really an important difference, that again, it relates to the regulation, to the ethics. There is another layer. I'm not sure about MSNBC because I'm not like viewing it, but I do read the New York Times. Okay, so I'm not like a TV person, but I offered it to also MSNBC, but I'm not sure. You will tell me as the audience. There is this like fact check. So the ethic of a good news organization is I'm going also to do fact check, and if it's not correct, I'm not going to broadcast it. This is another layer of protection. It's like self-regulation, okay? And I think it's lacking in some of other media, and then it becomes completely propaganda because I can transmit this like lie over and over and over. The election is stolen, the election is stolen, the election is stolen. Zero evidence, zero court ruling on that. We all know that it's fake, but I still will amplify it. So this type of irresponsible amplification, I see it less. It's not that it's completely lacking in the New York Times, but it's less. And I think that basically buy them some credit. But this is another example of regulation, right? It's like the ethic of being journalist. We're always talking about adding regulation to the process in order to stop bad behavior. And if we say we cannot regulate human nature, we're going to eat more. We're going to be more fatty. It's all about regulation.
Frank, last
question.
question.
So my question is, do we really want the government to be regulating opinions or opinions that are presented, no matter how unfortunate they are?
Okay, so when you say regulation, I don't say regulate the content, right?
Yeah.
And I don't say don't have free speech, right? For example, free speech doesn't mean that you need to amplify any crazy guy that's shouting with a megaphone because you will have millions more viewers because they like more extreme. So, you can shout with a megaphone, but you don't need to amplify it on social media. So if you reduce the structure of for example, social media, if basically, and it's not going to happen again because money is involved, they will not regulate themselves. But if you change the feed structure, not to amplify crazy people,
Right.
That will help. I'm sure. And crazy people are on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
But because we like more extreme stuff, and you let them propagate, we become more extreme ourselves. Or bring back the Reagan law, the law that Reagan took apart, that news organizations have to report both sides. Why not? Why we fine of making the news organization propaganda organization that like a sport team? Why we are allowing it? Because it's ruining our democracy. It doesn't tell you what to think. It simply asks you that you as a liberal will listen more to the Republican, and the Republican will listen more to you. This like structural regulation is about the structure of stuff. It's not about the content. So don't use regulation about the structures with regulation about the content, because that you don't want.
We've just scratched the surface. You're so appreciative of your work and think there's so much more to do. Thank you all for coming. And if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, please go to SustainableMedia.Center and sign up for the newsletter, and we'll let you know about programs coming up in the future. Thank you all. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Uri.
Thanks. Bye.